So it's election year, and the Tories are continuing to focus on their confected culture wars over immigration, so-called benefit scroungers, net zero and gender identity. It's all just a desperate attempt to distract the electorate from the dire state of the economy. And for the most part, it's failing. Because most people aren't that interested in politics and are far more interested in how well off they feel. To coin Bill Clinton's famous campaign phrase, it's the economy, stupid. And for all those who say, what's the point of voting, blue Tory or red Tory, they're all the same, well, the statistics alone say they're clearly not the same. In this video, I'll take a brief look at the 13-year stint of this Tory government compared to the 13-year stint of the previous Tony Blair Gordon Brown government from a purely economic standpoint. Track records rarely lie, and the difference in the Tory and Labour track record is stark. Stay tuned. In a post-Brexit British political landscape dominated by Tufton Street think tanks, we're drowning in reports funded by corporations and the super wealthy libertarian right, which swamp our mainstream media and serve to confuse and hide the true dire state of broken Britain's economic performance. But The Times, a Murdoch paper, recently ran an article which attempted to cut through the noise and come up with a balanced way to compare the 13 years under the last Labour government with the last 13 years of the Tories. To do that, columnist Emma Duncan of Oxford University explains her rationale for using something she calls the one big number as a fair comparison between the two governments. The one big number is quite simply real gross domestic product per head compared with the other G7 countries. Real, that means it's adjusted for inflation. Per head is the best measure of economic performance as it affects individuals in that country, and the G7 comparison at a stroke removes the relative effects of the war in Ukraine, the pandemic, the 2008 global financial crisis, and so on, as the rest of the G7 also had to deal with those crises at the same time as the UK. So, to cut to the chase, according to this former deputy editor of The Economist, writing in a Tory-friendly newspaper, during Labour's 13 years in power, Britain did better than the G7 average, close to the highest performing countries of Canada, the United States, Germany and France. During the Tories' 13 years, we're well below the G7 average. The Tories' OBN score, 0.7. In other words, under the Tories, our GDP per head is only 2/3 of the average GDP in the G7. That is shocking. And what's even more shocking is that our performance since the EU referendum has been markedly worse than before it. Since 2016, only Canada comes out worse than the UK, and that's only if you take the calculations to 4 decimal places. So it seems the idea of the Tories as the party for the safe stewardship of the economy is a complete myth. And that's even before Liz Truss came along as a real-life embodiment of the evidence. Trusting the Tories with the economy is like trusting Jimmy Savile in a mortuary. We're better off under a Labour government, and that's not an opinion, it's counting. The article in The Times does go on to discuss some other data points, but none of them really give such a clear picture one way or the other as the one big number. Although interestingly, real average wages increased 30% under the 13 years of the Labour government, more than any other G7 country, which compares to only 3% wage growth under the Tories, which puts us near the bottom of the G7 league table. And of course, economic well-being is only one factor to consider when it comes to voting. But alongside clear differences between the Tories and the current Labour Party on things like green investment, inheritance tax, the Rwandan performative cruelty, the NHS, childcare and education, I don't personally subscribe to the school of thought that says, oh well, they're all the same. They say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And while I'm not saying for one moment that Keir Starmer's Labour Party are particularly good, for example, they've certainly been dreadful on the Middle East, Brexit and supporting fair and reasonable union pay demands, I'm pretty sure though that everyone except the very wealthiest in our society will be a lot better off under a Starmer government than under the corrupt, oligarch-led libertarian government we're currently suffering.